Okay, so I've had a few DMs, and I'd like to respond to those first, if you'll indulge me. Firstly, yes, I know about the camera. It's an old camera. I've ordered a new one, but with COVID-19, it's taking longer to get here than I'd hoped. Um, and I thank people for listening to the video, and I really hope to be able to fix that problem quite quickly. Secondly, yes, the beard is really wild woolly, more so than it would usually be, um, largely because of my health problems. Um, I'm shielding, and even if I wasn't shielding, barber shops are still shut in Scotland. So um, hopefully the beard is not too much. I know a few people have only had positive things to say about it, so um, thank you for those. Related to that is that people have asked about my arm and my health. Now, I have numerous health issues. The main issue that affects my gaming is FND, and it means that my right arm does this. Um, and as you can imagine, that makes gaming challenging. And I don't think that you would want to try shaving with a hand that trembles like that. Um, Hopefully that clarifies a few questions. Secondly, I'd like to say a really big thank you to Tally and Evertar for the social media boost. I was quite happy to continue making content in my own little corner of the internet. But I am very, very grateful to everyone who has got in touch as a result of their social media tweets. It is, especially while I'm shielding, nice to know that other people have connected with my content. And I really hope that today's discussion doesn't ruin that. Um, so, as I said in my last video, one of the most difficult aspects for me and some of my friends to deal with is this constant barrage over accessibility. Often accessibility is given a bad name because it is seen as the direct opposite of the high skill reaction based game that high end players enjoy. This idea is reinforced when people like Mike stand on a platform of accessibility is why is in decline. Now, there are two different types of accessibility. One is about supporting and finding ways for the disabled community to enjoy World of Warcraft without being impeded by their disability. Now, Blizzard's done this on several occasions with things like the move pad, which should really have options to be resized independently of the UI and have a slider on the turn speed. Just saying. The colour blindness options, but also less obviously with additions like the giant fishing bobbers to help people with sight issues. Now, the other side of this argument is accessibility to content, and this is an argument which revolves almost entirely around the idea that I've paid for it, so I should have access to it. And while these two forms of accessibility sometimes overlap, they're not the same thing. And so for the purposes of this video, without meaning offence to anyone, I want to refer solely to the former and not the latter. Now, if you'll excuse the humble brags that are on the right side of the screen right now, I have completed some of the most challenging content in WoW up to the midpoint of Legion when my guild broke apart. Now, there are no prizes for guessing which raid was responsible for that. I completed the challenge mode dungeons in MOP and in WAD. I did the Mage Style artifact challenges on every single class except the healing classes, but I did get the Disc Priest. And the reason I couldn't do the healing challenges was simply because, despite the fact that I could get to the final boss with ease, I simply couldn't combat the game mechanics and my disability at the same time. The healing challenge required very specific target switching using the mouse, which, as I showed earlier in the video, mouse targeting is a bit of a problem for me. It's near impossible. In order to overcome these challenges, I've had to learn my class abilities. I've had to develop macros in-game to overcome many of the problems presented simply by having to play the game with effectively one hand. And I'm going to put some class guides together for other people that might be interested in that soon. And in many ways, I had to put in more effort than many non-disabled gamers did for the same reward. Now, I'm not advocating that I should get a bigger reward because I'm disabled. Just, yeah, that's not what I'm saying. But, and perhaps you would rank things differently, okay? But for me, Shadow Priest was easiest. I one-shotted that. And Prot Warrior was by far the hardest. Mostly because the one mobility issue that you rely on as one mobility ability you rely on as a warrior, your heroic leap, it can't be macroed to a target. You have to macro it to the cursor. And as I said again, mouse targeting, problem for me. Most high-end players have abilities like Heroic Leap, Death Decay, Blizzard, the cast and click spells. They have it macroed to their cursor so that they can cast them with one button instead of two. So I really don't see why Blizzard can't fix the macro system so that players have the ability to cast at target. I mean, something like Heroic Leap or Blizzard, if you're worried about PvP, I mean, you have the same issue. You click in the wrong place and you'll miss the player. You cast it from a macro, and the player's moving, it's still going to cast to the player location when you press the button. If the player's moving, you may miss them anyway. It's not a perfect fix, but it may offer solutions to players who can't use two hands at the same time, or who struggle to use two hands at the same time. And obviously, if you're talking about Shadowlands, in some cases, spells like Death and Decay, especially if you pick up the Pheromones ability, which is coming in Shadowlands, it's not really relevant to this. You're going to want to stand in your Death and Decay anyway, so casting it at yourself, at player, resolves that problem for most people anyway. But in the past, similar spells and abilities, Druid healing spells could be cast at a player using glyphs in MOP, for example. So this functionality exists in the game. It's just that Blizzard has decided that it won't be available to the player base, and I suspect a large part of that is because they believe it would affect game balance. But the only difference between cast at target or cast at cursor and cast at target macro is that a cast at cursor macro is more flexible than a cast at target. I guess part of the reason for that is Blizzard has a fear of botting or automating spells, and they fear that having every spell being castable at a target would encourage that behaviour. But I think personally that this comes down to a matter of preemptively banning functionality because it may be abused by some element of the player base. And I feel like you're, to pardon an analogy, you're effectively banning disabled car parking spaces because non-disabled people park in them. And I'm saying all this not to whine, but because the biggest issue that I have is when a non-disabled gamer says that, mechanical changes or content changes to the game, for example, currently the GCD changes, are down to the needs of disabled people. And, if you're honest and you think about this, the GCD changes mean that disabled gamers have to press more buttons, they have to break up their macros, and they have to become more dependent on less reactive cast sequence macros. So, actually, the GCD changes, which you, as a community, seem to be attributing to the disabled community, affect us more than they affect you. They don't make the game more accessible for disabled gamers, they actually make it less accessible for disabled gamers. And I know a bunch of disabled gamers who have become increasingly dependent on add-ons like Gnome Sequencer in order to become competitive when they're doing DPS. And it's not because they can't play their class, but it's simply because disabled gamers compensate for mechanical problems with in-game macros or simply by getting more gear. And getting more gear is not always an option. Now the video that you're watching, hopefully, is me doing a full Mask Vision solo. I mean, it's not perfect, but I can do it in 450 gear with a max level cloak. My tech tree is nearly complete, and I've got a whole bunch of haste. Now, Heroic Visions are some of the most disabled unfriendly content that Blizzard has ever released, but I'll talk about that another time. The point that I want to make is that when you have content like this, which is only a limited availability, like the Mage Tower was before it, and you have a potluck reward system that does not offer upgrades, potentially for weeks. I've done 17 straight Heroic Visions runs without an upgrade. It is that much harder for disabled gamers, excuse me, who are already struggling with this content, to potentially get extra gear they need to have a fair shot at the content in the game. Often what people are advocating for is equal challenge. When a disabled person is completing content the same level that you are completing it, that is not an equal challenge, because the player is not only beating the content, they're also compensating for added difficulty posed by the disability. So what we would argue as a community, I suppose, and I dislike speaking for all disabled people, but certainly everybody that I know, what we want is an equivalent challenge, not an equal challenge. An equal challenge isn't fair. An equivalent challenge is fair. Now that's very hard to manage in a video game, but it's not impossible. And I suppose if I have to leave you with one simple thought, it's that, as I mentioned earlier, disabled parking spaces are there for disabled people to use so that they can access facilities that they would otherwise struggle to. Now, sadly, there are people who will use them because it is faster for them to do what they need to do. And arguably, human condition, human psychology, encourages us to get the maximum reward for the minimum effort. And if you have a minimum effort option, people are going to take it. But you wouldn't ban disabled parking spaces because non-disabled people abuse them. So when you're talking about content, you know, that you believe is for the disabled community, accessibility for the disabled community, please bear in mind that we want a fair shot at the game. And that doesn't always mean that the way to deal with that is by giving us welfare epics, or the token system, which frequently doesn't offer you an upgrade, and basically is just things to disenchant to sell on the auction house. What we want is a means to earn gear, to complete content, to advance through the game. The same opportunity that non-disabled players have. Now, those are just my thoughts. I'm interested to know what you think about this, so please get in touch. Thank you.